Our journey along France's coasts begins in Étretat. In no other country in Europe has man left his mark on the coastline in so many different ways. Marked by history and extremely diverse geographic constraints, France's shores reveal an incredible variety of settings, atmospheres, and situations. Everyone wants a piece of the coast, to protect it, to defend it, to make it theirs. Flying over the French coastline means seeing both the best and the worst. There's a coastal protection agency and a coastal law to both protect and preserve these outstanding natural areas. At the same time, France remains the primary tourist destination in Europe. People from the northern countries flock to the beaches here. Its shorelines tell the story of these major seasonal migrations, the race for sun. You thought you knew all there was to know about this coast? Hold on tight. You're in for quite a ride. To begin with, the Normandy beaches. They'll always bear the scars of the World War II D-Day Normandy invasion. This artificial harbour in the little village of Arromanches is our first trace of history. It burst onto the world scene on June 6, 1944, as a key factor in the liberation. American warships docked here at these floating breakwaters and caissons. In 100 days, 400,000 men, 90,000 vehicles, and 800,000 tons of supplies landed in Europe through this harbour. Further on, Omaha Beach and the American Cemetery, with its row upon row of graves. 70 hectares, nearly 1,000 marble crosses. Further west, near Cherbourg, you might expect to find untamed and protected nature. Nope. The La Hague treatment plant is located at the tip of the Cotentin Peninsula. Nuclear waste from reactors all over Europe is treated here. The goal, reduce stockpiling of radioactive waste. Transport of this nuclear waste has ecologists worried. And then there's also the 230,000 cubic meters that gets flushed through an infamous pipe into the sea each year. Nuclear opponents claim this complex produces the most pollution of its kind in the world. This debate's not about to end anytime soon, especially with evidence that the region's crabs and lobsters have been contaminated. Further south, Mont Saint-Michel, an object of national pride, crowned with a flamboyant Gothic church, a major pilgrimage spot in medieval times. Today, it welcomes 3 million visitors per year. But Mont Saint-Michel is sinking into the sand. Major work has begun to save it, to keep the legend alive. Mont Saint-Michel has to remain an island. Even Victor Hugo said so. Just next door is Saint-Malo and its legendary ramparts, where about 10 years ago one of the world's most interesting underwater archaeological sites was discovered. Seaweed-strewn shipwrecks buried beneath 2 meters of sediment. And speaking of seaweed, further west, the beaches and bay of Saint-Brieuc can sometimes get overrun. It feeds on nitrate washed off agricultural lands by the rain. Green tides, not so good for tourism. Once we pass Saint-Brieuc, we at last discover the untamed shores of northern Brittany. No doubt the most well-preserved segment of the French coast and the most authentic. There's the rugged rockscape in Bréa and the pink granite coast. The wild and harsh coast has kept the shores from getting spoiled. The highest tides in Europe are recorded here, 12 meters. This also makes northern Brittany a paradise for shellfish gatherers. It's crazy what you can find when the tide is low. Seaweed, winkles, green crabs, razor clams, shrimp, velvet swimming crabs, mussels, abalone and shells. up to 1,000 tons of shellfish in Côte d'Amour alone. We find this ferry in the port of Roscoff, all ready to sail. The island of Bas isn't far. And then England, straight beyond. The channel isn't really that wide. At the western tip of Brittany, the island of Ouessant, and out at sea, its famous rail. A genuine maritime highway, one of the most heavily traveled sea lanes. 25% of the world's sea traffic sails through here. 150 ships per day, a daily transit of 700,000 tons of oil. Do you remember the oil spills? The Amoco Cadiz and, closer to home, the Erika, which stained and soiled Brittany's shores. Today, the traffic passes 30 kilometers off the island's shore. Are we out of danger? Could be. Let's go back to the mainland. Ras Point remains one of the most emblematic spots along Finisterre's granite coasts. Then it's up to the Gulf of Morbihan. Southern Brittany is the realm of sailboats, regattas, races on the open sea. The Gulf of Morbihan, a mini labyrinth well sheltered from storms. 300 islands, of which about 30 are inhabited. The most famous, Ars and Île aux Moines. Kids learn to sail on this little interior sea in the Gulf of Morbihan. This is where budding sailors become the great seafarers of tomorrow. Early morning on the Côte d'Amour. The Love Coast. The sea irrigates the 2,000 hectares of the Guérande salt works in keeping with the rhythm of the tides. The sun and wind do their job to heat and evaporate the water, leaving crystals of salt behind. And especially when the east wind blows and the powdery fine crystals float on the surface of the water, we get the fleur de sel, the crème de la crème of French sea salts. Though the Sultans suffered from competition from the salt mines, today over 250 traditional salt harvesters have formed a co-op to keep the tradition alive. Further on, we see what could be another salt works. But we're in Oloron. No salt here, just oyster beds, traveling oysters. Since Normandy's waters are richer than those of Charente, many oysters are sent to Normandy to fatten up. They return to Oloron for a few weeks of refining. A microscopic algae gives them their greenish tint and delicate taste. The Cordouin Lighthouse stands poised like a statue in the middle of the Gironde estuary. It's the oldest lighthouse still in operation in France, signaling the way along the Landes coast. A bit further, and we reach the Arcachon Basin, famous for its cabins on stilts, the crowning glory of Bird Island. The cabins are called chonke, after the Gascon word for the stilts shepherds used to use in the swamps of the Landes. Another site that's impossible to miss, the Pilat Dune, over 100 meters high, over 60 million cubic meters of sand. What's less obvious is that 100 years ago, the dune was only 35 meters tall. Today, it gobbles up 4 meters of the Landes forest per year. The dune keeps looming higher and higher above the sea, much to the delight of hikers, hang gliders, and sand surfers. Good idea. At the mouth of the Courant-Douché River, a little patch of paradise hidden away from view. We fly even higher to measure the strip of uninterrupted dune. 250 kilometers from the Gironde to the Pyrenees. Come on, let's leave the Atlantic now and head for other surprises and saltier waters. The Mediterranean. To begin, we have the little village of Collioure, tucked out of reach of the Tramontane wind. First of all, there's the Fort Saint-Elme, which dominates the harbour, a strategic spot in the defensive system of the Vermilion coast, and just beyond, the vineyards of Banyuls. Ah, the delights of the sun. But we won't be lounging about for long. Perhaps more than anywhere else in Europe, this coastline tells the story of the northern country's insatiable thirst for sun. Beginning in the 60s, Languedoc became the promised land of mass tourism. Huge campgrounds, heavy build-up along the coast. The airport in Montpellier nearly got upgraded to international standards so service could be run to new cities. Heliopolis is the city of the god Ra, spiritual capital of Egypt. Its modern counterpart is located here in Cap d'Agde. Further east, fresh and salt water blend in this unique village along the Canal du Midi. It's also called the Canal of the Two Seas. 250 kilometers long, it links the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And then suddenly, like a mirage, La Grande Motte. Beginning in the 60s, it became a sea resort created out of nothing, complete with pleasure port, buildings and campgrounds. An architectural experiment with buildings based on pre-Columbian pyramids. You either like it or you don't. But it's a real concept, a genuine urban museum that people make special trips to see it. Luckily, there's the Rhône and its delta, protecting a zone of ill-defined swampland, the Camargue. One of the rare undeveloped areas along the Mediterranean coast, the Mistral has turned it into a current hotspot for kitesurfing. The strip of dunes grows thinner, and at the tip of the national park we find Beauduc, a world unto itself, a little piece of the Camargue that holds its own. Small shacks patched together with this and that, right on the sand, where a few diehards keep saying no to cement. We almost feel like we're in a different country. But these musings don't last long. The mouth of the Rhone could almost serve as a border. On the east bank lies the largest petrochemical complex in France, Fos-sur-Mer. The site covers 10,000 hectares and is the European leader in natural gas. Modern, but still guilty at times of toxic leaks and air pollution. We're just a hop, skip and a jump from Marseille. As we continue east, we take a look at the Phocian city, so nicknamed for its Greek origin. Notre-Dame de la Garde dominates the town. And its tower blocks. Marseille, all decked out in white. Just outside the city, the rocky inlet's called the Calanque, a breath of pure sky, scoured clear by the Mistral. Despite several devastating forest fires, the area of the Calanque nevertheless remains a prime spot for meditation and adventure, a hotspot for rock climbing and diving. At the bottom of these limestone cliffs is where Cosquer discovered his cave. The Paleolithic gallery contains several dozen paintings and carvings on its walls. 20,000 years ago, the sea here was 120 meters lower than its current level, and now the cave's entrance lies 37 meters underwater. Just behind it is the little Calanque de Saumur, with its homes tucked out of reach of the Mistral, a symbol of Marseille's art of living. So that's it for the rugged, untamed coast. Now we hit the glitz and glamour. Welcome to the land of luxury, flashy show and concrete. From Saint-Tropez to Monaco, via Cannes, Antibes and Nice, this is the French Riviera. In just 50 years, the draw of the climate has spoiled the legendary charm of the Côte d'Azur. It's a mad scramble for opulence. Middle-class holidaymakers come to gaze upon the yachts of the jet set and dream. The sound of the cicadas has been replaced by gurgling jacuzzis. These villas, among the most beautiful along the coast, are where the big money lives. In Antibes, along Billionaires Row, we find multi-level yachts as big as buildings. They just keep upping the ante. At the end of the row, we see one of the biggest yachts in the world, complete with its own helicopter. Monaco does us in, once and for all. It's got the world's highest population and building density. Look at this hotel performing a balancing act. It seems symbolic of a financial system that could one day collapse, if there's a large enough tremor. We've headed southeast and are now in Corsica. Cape Corsica. Winds at force 8 today, with gusts of 50 knots. This is serious stuff. Enough to remind us that this little bit of France is wild and untamed. It's no secret, in fact, Corsica's just not something you take for granted. Untamed Corsica. The birds have got it right. Cape Corsica is a stopover on their migration route to North Africa. South of Calvi, the Scandala Nature Reserve protects 9,000 hectares on land and 1,000 out at sea. Cliffs of porphyry, volcanic rock that rises jagged above clear, deep waters. A diver's paradise. 40 meters below water, you find enormous sea whip coral. Corsica and its Calanque de Piana. With Genoan lookout towers, you can climb for an overhead view of the deserted inlets. An untamed coast, a world unto itself. Corsica's coast has other surprises in store. To curb real estate speculation and keep the shores from being encased in concrete, coastal law forbids building within 100 meters of the water. Here's a villa that's been bombed by nationalist movements fighting for the island's independence. Further on, we find these little inlets which give southern Corsica its charm. You have to seek them out and know where to find them, these little patches of paradise, along a footpath from the road or else by boat. We near the southern tip of the Island of Beauty to arrive in Bonifacio, a former Genoan fortress. Could these homes clinging to the cliffs be the most southern in France? Actually, they're not. There are other more modern and spectacular dwellings in the domain of Speron. Its own little world, a kind of Eden for millionaires, where the happy few play golf on one of Europe's most beautiful courses, overlooking the sea. So, there we are. Well, not quite yet. The southern tip of France is a nature reserve. 100-some islets grouped like a bunch of grapes off the coast of Bonifacio. You can't get further south than the Lavezzi Islands, the very end of French land. A wilderness of rocks just across from Sardinia. A genuine sanctuary classified as a natural reserve since 1982. This marks the end of our journey along France's coasts, with their conflicting personalities, the best, the worst. With its 5,000 kilometers of coastlines, France has nevertheless managed to preserve a few unspoiled natural areas. But the pressure is high to keep developing. We'll have to keep an eye out for trouble.